Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Friday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. Andy, the journey of 10,000 December miles begins Friday in Milwaukee. That's next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how or where you get your podcasts, always free, never behind a paywall. And Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you go to see the show and experience the visual version that usually goes up a little bit early before the audio version does. So a good way to get ahead of the game there. Got a lot of people on the Locked On Lakers YouTube page who do, in fact, note that they begin every single day, Andy, like their morning cup of coffee with this podcast. So we really appreciate it.
No, I can't think of a better way to start your day than helping Brian and I make money.
Yeah.
It's
true. And I like it when you phrase it that way. When you phrase it that way, the value add here for you and us is very clear.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we're giving you something. There's value in this morning thrill that you get either seeing or hearing us. But either way, help us pay some bills.
We're going to talk a little bit about LeBron. We're going to talk a little about starting lineups now that guys are sort of filtering back into the lineup. Darvin Ham's got most everyone available, or should, as the trip continues. But Andy, I mentioned in the open that this is the journey of 10,000 miles. That is about how far the Lakers will be traveling in December. Over the course of what amounts to two really long road trips. There's the one that they are starting tonight in Milwaukee that is 6 games long, and then they come back and play 2 very difficult home games against Boston and then Denver. And then they go out for what amounts to a road trip that lasts the rest of the month. There's a very strange, very random home game against Charlotte, like one game thrown in, but basically they spend the rest of December on the road.
I feel like any game against Charlotte is just sort of random. It feels like it's random that the Hornets are still in this league.
Are they the most random team in basketball?
Yeah. I mean, other than maybe the Pelicans, but the Pelicans and the Hornets have been literally interchangeable.
Yeah.
So I mean, they're sort of the same team.
But like the Hornets kind of feel like that team, like an NBA 2K that is the made up team because they couldn't get the rights to like the one franchise.
The Hornets, the Pelicans, the Bobcats, like these different incarnations. They've changed cities.
They all feel made up.
I mean, they feel random is the perfect way of putting it. Like it doesn't necessarily feel like there's a reason for them being there. Shout out to all of our listeners in New Orleans and Charlotte.
Yeah.
By the way, there's actually a fair amount of Pelicans people who come onto the YouTube channel because, given the stakes with this pick that is going to New Orleans this year, they like to come on and troll.
And also too, they want to make sure that the train stays on the tracks to Disasterville.
Yeah, but I was going to say they also help us make money, so thank you.
No, hey, their money spends just as well as
their random asses count just as much as everyone else.
So thanks to them. Welcome also to our fans in Charlotte. So let's talk about the first trip, though, because you and I think, both agree that for the most part, Indiana game notwithstanding, the Lakers, because we identified that stretch where they played San Antonio 3 times, and they had Detroit, and they had a winnable game against a struggling Brooklyn team that's sort of turning it around, but was playing really poorly at the time. The Lakers had a stretch where they really needed to string some wins together. And for the most part, they did. They could have been better if they had not blown the game against Indiana, but overall they accomplished what they needed to accomplish. And then the reason those games were so important was in part because you look at this upcoming road trip. Tonight in Milwaukee, Sunday at Washington. The Wizards, not great, but they're not terrible either. 500 team. Eastern Conference leaders in Cleveland, one of the best teams out there. You go to Toronto, second night of a back-to-back. A week from today, it's James Harden should be back playing with Philadelphia. You get them an Embiid. They're a good team. and finally Detroit, the only really genuinely lousy team on this trip. But it's also the last game of a 6-game trip, which makes it really difficult. And I think it was a couple of years ago, the Lakers went to Detroit and just got spanked, like just in a situation similar to this one. So
well,
in your
that team wasn't very good though. So
I'm just saying, I remember it was one of the worst games. Like I remember watching that game going, really, guys?
Yeah.
You're getting hammered in Detroit? Like really? So let me ask you this. What is a successful road trip? Like how many wins do you need for something like this to be considered a success just for this part? And then I want to expand the conversation out to looking at the month more broadly.
Well, I mean, first of all, just you're acknowledging it's a really difficult road trip. It begins in Milwaukee. A little bit of housekeeping for people who aren't aware. Chris Middleton is expected to be back in this game because, of course, he is, given what the Lakers are going through right now. Maybe there could be some rust, but obviously the Lakers don't gain any advantage from that. Also, Darvin Ham acknowledged after the win over Portland that this game against Milwaukee is going to be extremely emotional for him. He was part of Mike Budenholzer's staff for several years in Milwaukee. He won a championship there. It's his first time coaching against that team as a head coach. Interestingly enough, too, it's also the first time for him going into Detroit as a head coach. Where he won a championship with that 2004 Pistons. And I was wondering for a second, well, I'm sure he played against them after that. He actually didn't. He played one more season in 2005 with that team that went to the finals and lost against San Antonio. And then he was out of the NBA. And he's obviously been a part of staffs since then that have gone into Detroit. But I just found that kind of interesting too. Like the first time that he will be the guy in charge in the city that he won a championship with.
I mean, that's a lot. There's a lot going on in these games and with these teams. And you never know, mentioned Middleton's back, Harden should be back for the game against the Lakers on the 9th.
Because of course he will.
Right. I mean, he's reportedly aiming for Monday. And so even if there's a little delay, the expectation is they'll be playing. And who knows? I mean, Detroit's got some injuries, guys might be back for that. Probably Cunningham won't, but other guys that have been banged up could be. So with all that in mind, like is 3-3 a good trip for the Lakers?
Absolutely. 3-3 is a good road trip for a good team. Like if you are a contending team and you go on the road, unless it's a pretty soft road trip, against sub 500 teams that, these are the ones
the Lakers, and then you play the Lakers again, and then the Spurs, and then you return back to LA for the Lakers.
Exactly. Like, unless these are some games that you had earmarked as the ones that you help just stack wins and bump your record, 500 for a road trip of any difficulty, and this one certainly is credible. That's considered good anyway, much less for a Lakers team that's still below 500, playing better of late, but has hardly found itself.
So let me ask you this. Let's expand it out a little bit. So the Lakers, with their record currently 4 games under 500 as the game starts on Friday night. Mentioned some of the difficulty, the 10,000 miles of travel this month, and currently at least 11 of the 16 teams they play are somewhere in the playoff ladder, whether a play-in, whether they're actually in the top 6 or however you want to define it. They'd be playing postseason basketball of one form or another if the season ended today. There are 3 back-to-backs. There are 12 road games. 2 of the home games are against Boston and Denver. Do you think they can finish this month 4 games under 500? Because I feel like if we get up on January 1st and the Lakers are still 4 games under 500 when they finally come back, back to LA, early January, I think that is a massive win for this team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they've lost a lot of ground early on this season, and it remains to be seen whether they can make it up. But the one thing we know is they can't afford to lose more. You have to, if nothing else, hold serve until you can find the spots that you can pick to make your move, assuming you're capable of even making that move in the first place. But the one thing you can't do is go backwards. And, the Lakers have unfortunately already used up all of their going backwards allotment, like in the first 3 weeks of the season.
Yeah, it would be
Bad
nice
planning.
if they had a little bit of wiggle room to go a game or two under 500 on this trip and not have it be meaningful, or on this month and not have it be meaningful. But, maybe you can get away with, of the 16 games, and, they've already won one of them. Oh, no, I did the math wrong. That was a November game. If you have 16 games in November, maybe you can win. If you're not 8-8, maybe you can be 7-9, but you can't be much worse than that. Otherwise,
Look, the reality is, I will say this. The Lakers have a lot of work in front of them, but the reality is the West has so far not broken out in a way where 8-12 feels already buried. They're only 2 games right now outside of an eight seed. They're only 3 games outside of the 6th seed and avoiding the play-in altogether. And, the 6th seed right now is currently Sacramento. They've been playing well, but Sacramento has not, if nothing else, convinced me yet.
No, they're still improved. You prove it.
Right.
Prove it.
So, Dallas has been having its struggles this year. Golden State has been better of late, but, they're still a 500 team. Minnesota's going to be without Karl Anthony Towns for a while. There's opportunity there in front of them. So it's very fortunate for them.
Let me ask you one more question, though, because you said the opportunities there. We've talked about kind of what would be nice to come out of this in terms of the record. You can't be too much below 500. At least that's the hope. The hole gets deeper. So the question I want to ask you next is, how confident are you that the Lakers can play 500 basketball over this incredibly brutal stretch of December games? So that's the question for you, Andy, next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net, your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball, soccer, and esports. They've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, which of course you do, you're listening to one right now, you can find those at BetOnline as well. It's always the fastest, easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device. Learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts.
So let's say, 8-8, 7-9, 9-7 would be a spectacular result. But let's, sort of looking at where, the challenge of treading water, like you said, at the beginning of the first segment, for a good team, a team that's played really well, this type of stretch of games, if you're 500, if you're a game or two above, whatever it is, that is really good. So the Lakers have obviously started to play better. I think that is kind of difficult to debate at this point. How confident are you that they can come through with a 500 record or sticking pretty close to that over these 16 games?
I think it's possible. I'm not sold on it yet, but the trends, I think, have leaned more towards capable than incapable, as opposed to earlier in the season when, as much as you and I both thought this is not a 2-10 team, they're too talented for this, and there are extenuating circumstances for this record being so bad, the schedule being brutal to start, guys missing to start the season, all the new faces, blah, 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 blah. They were better than that, but they're still not a great team. We still have not seen anything close to consistent greatness, sometimes consistent goodness, particularly against upper end or, just solid competition. We haven't seen a ton of it. So this month gives them a real opportunity to, while they are playing better, go up against some real competition. If they go 500 for the month of December, it still remains to be seen where they stack up in the West, and you start thinking about trade possibilities. How much of a move can they make? But one thing's for sure: if they do that for December, they're officially a pretty solid team at the very least.
Oh yeah, I think that shows that they've got a chance to stay in it and do all that stuff for the rest of the season. Absolutely, because that's a real sample size. So 16 games against 11, 12 playoff caliber teams, whether fringy or otherwise, is a good enough sample size, especially when all of them come on the road. And like I kind of want to believe, like if you look at what the Lakers have done over the last 8 games, where they're 6-2, competition notwithstanding, some bad teams obviously that they've played, they're sixth in the league in offensive rating, which has been a massive problem for them over the course of the season, is just scoring enough points to be competitive in games. They're a top 5 team in defensive rating. Now that one I think can slip as you start to go on the road. You can't expect the defensive performances to be that good when you're playing really good teams on their floor. But that's why the offense matters. And so you look at it, they're plus 8.7 over their last 8 games, Andy. Like that is legit good basketball. You're up there with Boston and the Cavs and the Suns, who have been as hot as anyone. The Pelicans, again, shout out to our New Orleans listeners, have been as good as anyone. Like I kind of want to believe, like tonight, for example, I don't expect them to win. I don't expect them, except for the Detroit game, necessarily to win any of these games. Like I can't point to the one that say, "Oh, I think they'll beat Toronto on the second night of a back-to-back." But I kind of feel like they have a good chance to finish 3-3. I think they're playing well enough that they could win 2 other games that aren't the Pistons game. But
For what
that game against Detroit becomes monumentally important.
Yeah, I mean that one is the given in terms of you simply have to win it.
Right.
In
2
my
and 3,
head,
3-2-4, whatever it is. Yeah.
in my head, the 3-3 comes with Detroit winning against the Wizards, who have been solid this year and they've been very good at home, but I think are beatable. And then LeBron doing something in Cleveland. Like even though Cleveland is arguably the best of the teams that they're facing, certainly second best at the worst. Just LeBron has a track record of doing some good things in that building, whether representing them or going against them. And I think LeBron is very aware of wanting to bring his A game in that building, no matter
especially
what the
now.
context.
I think especially now, Andy, where there is more whispers of the mortality of those father time commercials with Nike might be the wrong season for them. Like they might be
I thought
a
you
little...
meant because I thought you meant because he'd be auditioning for Cleveland, like
Right.
wanting to join them.
No, I don't think he needs to
near
audition for
future.
that. I don't think he needs to audition. I think it's a little like Brad Pitt doesn't read for roles anymore. Like you either
Right.
want Pitt, you want Clooney, you want Matt Damon, or you don't. He doesn't audition. Mr. Damon, he's like sitting in the room with a bunch of other people that you never heard of. But I do think he's aware of the show that or the perception, and will want to go and put on a show. You do mention Washington, you do mention Detroit. I know people are sick of it. These games, all good teams really make their record against lesser competition. You don't win 60 games in the NBA only against good teams. But these are the games that the Lakers, can't afford to give away. And then you just steal them against the good teams. So before we get to LeBron, I wanted to ask you, and maybe some lineup stuff. There's some reporting, Silver Screen and Roll posted it the other day about how the Lakers are interested in perhaps holding on to Russ, but seeing if you could extract value and maybe making a smaller deal for Kendrick Nunn and Pat Beverly. Give the Lakers maybe $20 million to work with, give or take. And you could find a different level of player. Maybe you only have to give up 1 pick to do something as opposed to 2. How likely do you think it is the Lakers can get something good for those 2 guys? Because I am somewhat skeptical.
Are they willing to take on any long-term money? Because if the answer is no, this ain't happening.
That's why I'm skeptical.
Like they have to be willing to take on some long-term money because otherwise, unless a team, in theory, if the Lakers are looking to avoid the Russ and 1 pick, Russ and 2 picks type deal, they're trying to avoid giving up either of these picks, ideally, like if they're looking to go that route, which means that unless you are helping another team get off their money with Beverly's expiring and Nunn's expiring, what's the incentive? Like there's none. So the Lakers.
I see what you did there.
I didn't, but thank you. There's no reason for another team to do this unless the Lakers are helping them out with that type of financial commitment, and it just seems like they've been unwilling to do that for anybody that isn't a star. So,
and you're not gonna get a star for the salary relief of $20 million, and it's just
no picks.
Right, or even 1 pick. It's just this is where I start to get really skeptical of all these these reports, just because I don't think the Lakers will do it. It's not that I think you couldn't find some kind of trade out there, but I just don't think you go through. I'm thinking like Rob Pelinka, because this is not the approach I would have been taking anyway. I don't think you go through all the pain of like, no, preserving this space, and this is the direction we're going, and we're not going to trade Westbrook to bring in other guys. We're going to wait. We're going to do all these things. We're going to hold off and take what's behind door number 2 this summer, and then give it up for a mid-ish type player that you can acquire for Patrick Beverly and Kendrick Nunn. It just doesn't seem like something they're going to do. It seems like another way to put off making trades and just kind of look like you're kicking the tires across the market and doing stuff. That's just my perception.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's very obvious the Lakers are not totally sold on LeBron and AD as their core. They're certainly not sold on their ability to properly supplement them this season through a trade.
Right.
I think it's not entirely unreasonable to feel either of those opinions. It's certainly, as much as the Lakers made several awful mistakes leading us to this point and boxing them in, like, you don't put out a house fire by adding more fire. You know what I mean? Like, at some point you may have to let the thing burn itself out. And that might be this season if they ultimately feel like, or if nothing else, they feel like we have one shot at putting out this fire. Our best chance at putting out this fire is this off season as opposed to in mid season.
Yeah. But it's so weird to me. And we'll go to LeBron after this, but like, I get this. There are times when I feel like, you can't call Rob Pelinka necessarily risk averse because he traded for Russell freaking Westbrook. I mean, like, that's risk. He's blown up a championship team like 3 times since they won. So it's hard. You can't call him risk averse because these are all risky moves, but there are times when I feel like right now they're sort of paralyzed by the fear of failure, the fear of doing the wrong thing. It's, a General McClellan that Lincoln had to fire, but because he just wouldn't attack the enemy. And like, I get that kind of vibe, and it's either because it's just smart at this point, they're too far gone to try to fix it, or he just can't choose between a bunch of bad choices. Got a really interesting comment from a viewer on the YouTube page, Andy, that I want to read and get some thoughts from. So we'll do that next regarding LeBron and how he's used by the Lakers. So we'll get to that next. Okay, so mention the Locked On Lakers YouTube page. This comment came from Babatunde Ogundare, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name. We were talking about how LeBron was used in the fourth quarter Wednesday in the win against Portland. Lower usage rate than Anthony Davis, for example, fewer points, whatever. Both of them had really good fourth quarters, and obviously so did the Lakers. So he left this comment on the YouTube page. I also think a formula in which LeBron used in this game, which will definitely work, is for LeBron to not run the offense in the first 2 quarters. He should allow Austin Reeves, Westbrook, Dennis Schroeder to run their sets and then get into pick and roll with AD late in games. That's the foundation for a good run. I took this, not necessarily even you think of it literally, but just the idea that if LeBron needs to preserve his legs, and like we talked a lot about earlier in the week, like Derek Fisher talking about the way age sneaks up on players. If you want a strong LeBron in the fourth quarter, instead of what he has been doing, which is really aggressively try to orchestrating and setting up AD and so on, maybe laying back in terms of orchestrating the offense so that he has more available to him in the fourth quarter. When you saw that comment, what did you think?
I understand where he's coming from. I wonder if the role players that he mentioned, particularly Austin and Schroeder, are good enough, ideal enough to be doing that more. I mean, like Russ for all of the Russ that comes with Russ, that he can do that thing that we're talking about. Like Russ, if nothing else, is very good at getting downhill and either kicking out, creating looks for other guys, or getting himself to the line. Sometimes it's going to be missed layups, whatever. But like Russ can do that. Reeves and Schroeder can do it, but they're also guys that you wonder about where does a little go a long way start becoming you're asking too much of these guys, because the question heading into this season and also during the season has been, is there enough around LeBron and AD that the Lakers actually have a championship team beyond whatever questions you have about LeBron and AD with health, LeBron with age, that sort of thing. It's hard to ask those questions but then also say let them do more. Right. You know what I mean? Like I question whether 5 or 6 more sets per game run by Austin and Dennis will bear as much fruit as this guy's picturing.
It's an interesting question, though, of like, what's the balance here? Like, can you run? Because it doesn't mean LeBron isn't involved in the offense. It just means he can be at the end of a pass as opposed to the beginning of it. He can be the guy who finishes something as opposed to, attacks a defense with 5 sets of eyes kind of on him and has that kind of physical grind. I do think, though, you can get enough out of your play calling, and Lonnie Walker has been a better facilitator than I think I expected at the very least. And Reeves is very good at, if nothing else, being sort of the connective tissue in an offense. Is he a lead point guard, sort of Chris Paul-esque kind of? No, I don't think that's the role you want him playing, but he always makes the right pass, and you can put him in sets and give him responsibility in that way. Schroeder is not a classic Chris Paul point guard either, but he is still an NBA point guard. I feel like they've got enough there. I feel like there is enough that there are ways to do this. And really what I just thought was so fascinating about it is this idea of thinking about ways to accommodate is the wrong word, but to maximize LeBron. And making those sort of mental concessions that, you told the story about Byron kind of having trouble understanding where Kobe was in his career at the end. Like the Lakers making those kinds of calculations around LeBron. It's not that he can only play 20 minutes a night, but it's like, what can we tweak here? Wednesday night, it seemed like go faster. Don't let defense get set so they can, bully you or make it harder for you in the half court or whatever. Is there an equivalent of that with when LeBron really orchestrates the offense? And it got me thinking in sort of a different way, because it does make sense that he run out of gas in fourth quarters, particularly in very difficult games.
Yeah. I mean, again, I understand why the question will be asked. There might be a middle ground between giving, Russ, Dennis, and Austin more and making sure you're not giving them too much, or, frankly, that you're not taking away too much from LeBron, because, there's a reason you want him out there 35 minutes a game. You know what
sure,
I mean?
And doing 35 minutes and doing stuff.
Right.
Like not passive.
Sure. But it's an interesting thought. And if nothing else, empowering the guys around your stars, assuming they're capable of it, it's never a bad thing.
I do think, as we sort of wrap it up here, like when you think about lineups, when you think this will be a trip where, let's assume Walker can get back on the floor. He's questionable for tonight's game, but assuming he can get that foot, lets him get back on the floor reasonably soon. Dennis Schroeder may not be with the team because his wife, I think we're pretty sure it's
It's being reported that his wife is expecting. He's being listed as questionable for personal reasons. Most people reporting this are assuming, this is the reason, just, wanting to be there when the child is born. Hopefully it's not anything more serious than that.
Their children.
Troy Brown is probable, though.
Right. So the other thing that I think will be really fun and fascinating to look at over the course of this trip, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a lot on the show, is will Darvin sort of start paring this down, or is everybody in the backcourt going to play? Does Beverly kind of continue to kind of have his playing time shaved away as more players are available? So we'll see what goes on there. What does he do with Troy Brown now that he's back? Who loses some playing? Does Thomas Bryant stay in the lineup for anything other than, sort of specialty games? Played a lot against Portland because they have Yusuf Nurkic, who is a massive human being. He'll play against Philly with Embiid, maybe, Milwaukee with Lopez, but like, does he get regular time anyway? Like those kinds of things. There's so much still to develop with this team. If they can continue to play well, that will be very interesting to watch. So
let me throw this out there before we go. You don't
Sure.
have to react to it, but certainly the viewers, if they want to leave comments to it, feel free on the YouTube channel. I was thinking about this because we had talked about discussing it. And if Darvin were to go with a 9-man rotation, these were the 9 guys that I identified as I think should be in the rotation: LeBron, AD, Reeves, Lonnie Walker, Russ, Troy Brown, Thomas Bryant, Schroeder, and Wenyen Gabriel. If he was looking for a 10th, I'm guessing it's either going to be Beverly or none. But I would personally like to see him go with Max Christie, because I think there are certain things that you get from Christie in terms of size, in terms of athleticism, defensive instincts, that none of his skills at their best may be as good as Kendrick Nunn's scoring when he's on, or Beverly's defense. But I think Christie does some things that neither one of them can. But those were the 9 definites, one maybe more. It's hard to go beyond 10 on a regular basis.
It's hard to play 10
but
sometimes.
Anyway,
yeah,
that's
let's
the 9.
Let's watch what they do this weekend and revisit that, because what the rotation looks like, who is and should be in it, is going to be a big topic for this trip. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you go to leave answers to questions like the one Andy's asking. Who is your 9-man rotation? Who would be the 10th person that you would put in there? So we appreciate all the comments people leave there. We will see everybody, at the very least, we'll see you on Monday, and we'll see about what happens after the game on Friday.